Welcome back into the We Shall Not Sleep podcast. Thank you so much for joining us once again this week. Wow, what a privilege to be back with you and in such a cool way with another interview. This week, we got something special for you. Pastor Tracy Collier has been an amazing, amazing mentor in my life. We've known each other for well over a decade now. I went to youth group with her daughter, and in fact, we're the same age, share the same birthday. So shout out to you, Stephanie. And truly, Pastor Tracy has been an important figure in my life because she was a co-heir, is how I would describe it, with this young adult group that I led for 5 years while I was at JaxNaz Church. And Pastor Tracy is continuing to do great things at JaxNaz Church. And one of the ways that you will find in this episode today is just how much of a heart she has for ministry and the fact that she has been divinely appointed. She's a groups pastor at JaxNaz Church for a reason, and I believe you will find out more about that and why she is in that wonderful position. So, thank you for those who continue to support us and who continue to leave us feedback. So, connect with us anywhere that you see podcasts or listen to podcasts, rather. I guess. Well, you can see them too, right? And or including, I guess, our YouTube channel. I should probably throw that out there. If you ever have a question or a topic request, feel free to email us at wsnspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much, everybody. Without further ado, here is Pastor Tracy Collier. Pastor Tracy, it is
Yes.
amazing to see you this evening. Thank you so much for doing this podcast. I'm so excited. As I was telling you with you just a few seconds ago, is what I tell listeners our pre-show meeting, which lasts all of a minute. That
Right.
I have wanted to interview you. You were on the short list for that for such a long time, and being able to interview both you and James in particular because you have had such a tremendous impact in my life. I just want to share that with everyone else who listens to this podcast. So thank you for making yourself available.
It's been my pleasure. I'm very excited too. I'm happy that it's worked out. I think we're gonna have a good time.
I think so too. Well, I have the privilege of being able to ask people this question because I think it's very important for others to hear of the journey. And I think anytime we can get an opportunity to tell our Christ journey and how we come to Christ, how we came to be saved, is so important because it's no one's is the same. Might have similar themes, similar upbringings, but how Christ reaches the heart and not just the head, but actually changes the heart is so important. So if you could, this the first question is I love this is my favorite question to ask is how does Tracy Collier end up being a Christian? What is your story to Christ like?
So I'm hoping that this is the most unique story, and you'll never have another story like this.
Probably
It's
not.
probably true. So I didn't grow up in church, but my family was very moral and upright in their thoughts and beliefs, and I knew all the Christmas stories or the Christmas songs about Jesus, and I knew a bunch of Bible stories. So it wasn't as though that was kept from me. We just didn't go to church. Um, but when my husband and I had been married about a year, we were invited to a multi-level marketing business. And we got into business with these people, and the business was Amway. We were super excited about it. We met a lot of really cool people through that. And one of the things they would do is have these out of town functions where they'd have these national known speakers, both building that business and just these um, entertainers you would know. Like, they were pretty famous at the time, and this was in the late 80s and early 90s, so they were famous at that time, and just encouraging. And we saw John Maxwell a few times, and Zig Ziglar, and just these really cool, interesting motivational speakers and leadership people. But one of the things that would happen at these out of town weekends is a Sunday morning service. And we'd seen a couple of them, and they did this altar call, and it was fine, for them. But one, we skipped one. And the people we were in business with, a friend of mine said, "Hey, that's part of the weekend. You need to be there." And we went the next one we went to happened to be in Denver. 24 hours by car. And I know this because we drove overnight, like straight through with everybody in the car. We just did it to get there in time and to not take off too much time from work. But we were there for the Sunday morning service, and I was sitting there. So I've been for a year. I've been around these people who talk about God a lot, and they go to church, and it was all nice and everything. But God was speaking to me that whole year. And when the altar call came, I remember thinking, I have chest pain. I can't wait another 3 months for the next time we go to this weekend function to respond. I have to go now. And my husband Scott was sitting next to me, and I turned to him and said, I have to go. And at the same moment, he said something to me that I didn't know. I had no idea what he said. And I got up and I went to the front, not even having an idea of what was going to happen after that, just that I was, God was calling me and I had to go. And I got to the front and I looked to my right, and there was my husband. And he was having chest pains as well. This like almost painful physical ache to answer that call. And I looked to my other side, and my parents were on the other side. So it wasn't just I know a lot of people who one of the spouse comes to the Lord and then they wait for the other spouse. And I have always been so grateful and thankful to God that Scott was being called in the same moments and responded in the same way, so that we started our walk with Christ in the same moment, literally. And I think that's incredibly unusual, through Amway of all things. So it's a pretty unique story.
Yeah.
But it's, like you said, it's cool to find out how people came. And it wasn't that Christ wasn't speaking to me the whole time, my whole
Sure.
life, with my parents' influence and hearing Bible stories and different things like that, but just never having that more week in and week out uh, development of my faith that never, didn't happen when I was younger. So
Now, I'm asking you to date yourself here, but what year would that have been? You said you were married already, so
I
what's
think
the timeline?
it was like 1991. It was the end of June in 1981. So actually, does that
Oh, wow.
mean that
Yes.
it was that we're coming up on our
Look at that.
anniversary of being Christ followers?
30th
That's pretty
30th
cool.
anniversary. That is awesome. So, I mean,
Yeah.
and that would have been before you had Stephanie, and
Right.
all that.
Yep.
So that's before
Yep.
you had kids. So like that, and that has to be really special considering I would imagine that that journey in a way adds to what would come later, which is your family and maybe seeing having kids like in
Yeah.
a whole different way.
Right. And it's, that's another thing is um we have friends who at the time who either did or didn't have kids but watched us and watched the journey we were on, and when again we watched them, and I'm also forever grateful that we were saved before we had kids. It allowed a different kind of foundation for our family, and it doesn't mean that just because we'd accepted Christ we got it right all the time, and because that's for sure not the case. But it just gave us such a different perspective, and again that foundation for our marriage. Early it was early on in our marriage, and it was pretty rocky in the beginning, and it didn't clear up overnight, but I'm still married to him, and we're going to celebrate, I guess that would be 32 years this August.
All
um
right.
so yeah, so that's, and I it was the people we hung out with, the books that we read, and the things that we listened to, that made the difference. And as soon as we accepted Christ, our reading habits changed, and what we listened to changed. That we didn't change who we were hanging out with really, and we were already getting really good relationship and leadership materials in our hands all the time. but it made more sense to us at that point too.
Hmm. Yeah, just another, it's just adding to it, adding another layer. That's beautiful. And by the way, the fact that impacts marriage, and that's a unique factor because you're able to see the contrast before and after. And I
Right.
I don't know, when we talk about raising children. Of course, I don't have any children, but I look at my parents, for example, and look at some of the members in my church who celebrated milestone anniversaries here recently. It's, I think, such a wonderful testimony, if not the best testimony, when a husband and wife can celebrate marriage, because that's supposed to represent what Christ did for the church. And when you can, train up a child and raise a child, in the church, but also have a healthy marriage that was, brought together or reconsecrated to God. That, I think that's probably
Right.
one of the best testimonies, because that's walking out the walk. That's being able to be with someone, sacrifice, love someone, even through the ugly times, right? And
Right. Well,
that's so
yeah,
cool.
and it makes a huge difference because um I have periodically over my life thought what a great person I am and how, I'm probably not the one who's at fault in any given situation. And the reality is, when I started having Christ's perspective, um, that matters a lot less about whether or not I'm right or wrong. What matters is, what does Jesus want? Andy Stanley says, "What would love have me do?" And I think, well, that's the answer to the question. Um, what would love have me do in this situation? Probably keep my mouth shut most of the time,
Hmm.
or speak love into the situation, or not have my own needs come first. And it's not, again, don't haven't gotten it right every time, but I definitely look at my husband differently, and that he is a child of Christ and that God loves him more than I do. And I need to take my cues from God because God knows what he's doing. um
Well,
and we've and that's a mutual thing with Scott and I think we're very, very blessed. We're very fortunate to have the marriage that we do.
Well, I mean, that just demonstrates your humility, which, uh, turns out is what's also needed in ministry. Which, that's a horrible segue to my next question. Something is,
No,
how
no,
does
it's
how's
great.
so how
That was
does
super smooth. You did great.
so smooth that I had to really point it out. So you're a Christian. Your marriage is redefined. You have kids, and then at some point you're crazy enough to accept the call and go into ministry. And I'm wondering, is there, what connective tissue do you find from that moment that you accepted that call, that basically alleviating that burden, that heavy chest that you had, when you gave your life to Christ, to, holy cow, now I'm actually going into full time ministry. What is that journey like? And this might probably my second favorite question, because, oh my gosh,
Well,
what a journey that
yeah,
must be.
it's like our thumbprints. Every Mine is unique to me. My story is unique to me, and it's got the swirls and the whirls and all kinds of things that are um, what God did in and through me. So the pre story is, um, I accepted Christ on a Sunday. And on Monday, I was thinking, wow, I love him so much and he gave up everything for me. How do I serve him? Literally, on we were coming home and I was thinking, well, now I want to live my whole life for him. I don't even know what that means. And by the next, it was within a week or so, I had found a place to volunteer in ministry. Um, so that draw, for me, has always been there. My family is a volunteering family. My parents find a project or a group that needs help or something, and they dive deep. And um, so growing up, that was pretty normal for us to do something as a family for years. We would have a thing that we would do, and we would do that thing for years in support of an organization. So the idea of volunteering was no big switch, but I was very excited about finding actual ministry places to volunteer, and did that through a Christian helpline that was local for a while, and through the local Christian radio station. And then I worked there for a bit. But and at that time too, I became the secretary of our church. So we'd gotten involved in a church. All of our friends went to church in another town in Lansing, but we lived in Jackson. And all along, I wanted to be involved. And it was difficult to be so far away and then to be going back to Lansing for every activity or everything that we wanted to be involved in. And they ended up having a daughter church here in town right about the time we were saying, um, you know, is there a church we could be at here in our town in Jackson? Got involved at that church, very plugged in right away.
Hmm.
And then our pastor, after a year, he died, and his wife had been the secretary. Unbeknownst to me, the board and the his wife said, we think Tracy would make a great church secretary. And
Oh, wow.
I was blown away. I was on part of the counting team, so I helped count the offering, and I was doing a lot of I think I was running children's ministry. It was a very tiny church, but I was doing a lot of different things. And I'd been a secretary before we had kids. So I had been working full time. I had a lot of office
Hmm.
skills, and I was happy to take this part-time position, and I just couldn't believe they pay me to do this job because it was such a great job and I loved it. And I did that job for part-time for many years. We worked out where for us it was important to not use daycare if we could avoid it. And so I either worked part-time or not at all while our kids were little. And then once they got into school, I worked a little bit more. And then or Scott would have a second shift or whatever. We just kind of made that work.
Hmm.
So having a part-time position at the church was beneficial. Um, After about 5 years and having the I had people speak into my life and say, you may want to pray about pastoral ministry, or you could make a good care pastor, or they would bring these different things, words I'd never really heard before. As far as um, I knew there was a lead pastor, but I didn't really know about other pastoral roles in ministry. And I knew I never had any inkling that God was calling me to lead a church. Certainly to be a part of a church, an active part, but never to lead. So I never really considered that. Um, but I'd started to feel that call and think he really is calling me to pastoral ministry. I don't know what that looks like. I started taking classes, and at the time, and this will sound um, I was thinking about how candid should I be with this, because I don't want to give the wrong impression. But the person who was my boss at the time, so that made him the pastor, I went to him and I said, I believe I might be called to pastoral ministry. And his response was very shocking. Now you have to remember, this is a human being. This isn't what God said. This is what a human being said, and a human being who ultimately lost his job for some other things, but he was not suited for the role he was in at that time. But he said, if I have anything to say about it, you'll never be a pastor. And I went, excuse me?
Uh,
um, why
yeah.
would you say that? And because I felt like I had really made myself vulnerable um, before God and man, because I that was, my heart was turning towards that role. And he said, because I was more beneficial to him and the church as his secretary than I ever would be as a pastor. That was his take on the matter. Um, so that was halfway through my 10-year stint as a church secretary. And when God had been clear for a while near the end of that time that we were done there, that we had concluded our ministry time there, and we left and came to the church that we're at now. And I was on staff here 18 months after we got here, but in a non-pastoral role.
Hmm.
And when that call came around again, it was a uh God calls, but the body affirms. And that was happening again, the same kind of thing. I was already on staff at a church, uh started out part-time, then went to full-time. And um, it was happening the same way. And I thought, I trust this ministry, this church that I'm at. I trust my boss. I trust the leaders in this church. Um, I trust God. I think this is what I'm called to do. So it was a lot of good counsel, a whole lot of prayer, and to risk that again, I think was probably my greatest point of faith. To remember that that was a human being who said something that wasn't from God. It didn't change my desire to serve God. It, I think the a lot of that when we saw the time when we left one church and went to another. I know a lot of times people will leave a church because they feel God calling. They know something's not right. They get wounded. There's many reasons that people can leave, and unfortunately, they don't find another church. For us, that was paramount. We knew we weren't done with God. It was our time at that ministry was done, and it was very clear to us, thankfully, very obvious to us. And so we didn't miss a Sunday. We went from the old place to the new place, and realized that the new place was the place we were staying. So it was definitely it was kind of, looking back, it could have been a roller coaster, but honestly, through it all, God was equipping me and leading me and comforting me in that point of thinking, did I get it wrong?
Hmm.
Did I hear him wrong? Um, and I never thought that I had. I thought that that was what I recognized there was a person, and that person was not in charge of my destiny. And I just needed to do whatever God was calling me to do. And and here we are.
What a demonstration of faith and perseverance, especially. I mean, it takes a very mature person to realize that, separating that it is a man, it wasn't God, because you see that. And I think that's going to be a point of conversation here later on. But what is the timeline there? Because honestly, I don't have the best memory in the world, but what's the timeline of you accepting that call to full time ministry as we understand it now? What year was that have been?
I would say that that was so 6 years ago,
Okay.
maybe 7 years ago now.
Okay, that
I think that's
matches. I
about
know it was
right.
in this past, well, decade. Um, and the
Hmm.
reason, and one of the reasons that I have so much wanted to have you on this particular show is because of the day-to-day working with you when I led immersion at JaxNaz Church, the young adult group that
Right.
was really just kind of dumped in my lap. I don't really know how else to say it. And then I'm like, okay, so I have no idea what I'm doing. And you were right there from the very beginning to help guide. And, basically, you gave me a framework. You're like basically the bumpers in bowling. We raised up the bumpers and you said, okay, Michael, we're headed towards the pins. This is your guideway, and I'm going to help keep you in this path. And you did such a good job. You never overreached. You never, even when I was doing something that was a little brash, at 22, 23 years of age, thinking I know stuff, you didn't slap me across the face verbally. You said, okay, now let's think about this for a second. Have you considered this? It was never a point of shame. It was never of, hey, your motive is wrong, like I've seen in other leaders. You're always so calm, very, very calm. It's the one of the words I would use to describe your leadership, is that you're never flailing. And that's something that it was so
Mm.
important to me. And that's it's something I don't see in a whole lot of people, is the calmness. I see that you definitely share that with James. I think it's the reason why I like you two so much. But you know, the thing is, I'm curious where that comes from, because when I had the privilege of being a part of a Nazarene conference out east a few years ago that you guys sent me to. One of the things that we affirmed at that meeting is that the Nazarene Church at that time was not doing enough to encourage and basically offer support for the female pastors. And in a church that Protestantism, that's pretty much split on whether or not women are qualified to serve in the ministry. Nazarene Church is one of those churches that absolutely affirms that calling. And so my question to you is for a lot of men out there who think that women are so emotional, which is, oh my gosh, like, yeah, if you don't think men are emotional, you just have to look at the stock market, right? That I'm just curious, like, what has been your rock? How have you stayed so calm, and how have you met the adversity of being a woman in a position that historically speaking has pretty much been reserved for men?
That now, see, I think that's a really good question, and it has so many facets. I think there are times that it's not necessarily about the role in church, um, as much as it's when I have met adversity, it's been outside of the church for the
Oh,
most part. I mean, aside from that one person, um, and it's knowing and understanding authority, understanding that um, people are ignorant of things. It doesn't mean that they're dumb. It just means they don't know. um, Understanding that people who have an opinion about me or my role or women in ministry in general probably have misinformation. They probably don't have all the facts. And I like to give people the benefit of the doubt because I don't know. I don't know what they've been through or what they know or whatever. Um, I also know that's personality. I know that there is facets of my personality that I think I am. I think obtuse is the word. I often will say that if someone was trying to offend me, I usually wouldn't notice. I just miss it. If people have tried to be offensive, most of the time it just goes over my head. So, and that's probably God. I mean, that's probably wiring, but that's God has given me that gift or whatever. I also like to have a good time. I like to laugh, and I like peace in my life. And that's not to say that I won't address conflict, because I understand that addressing conflict and having resolution means peace. Um, Sometimes you have to go through things to get to peace, but peace is very important. And so all of those things, whether they're personality driven or things I've learned, I think those are all factors um, that have prevented me from feeling either oppressed or facing much of adversity as far as being a female pastor. Most of the time, I don't actually, when I'm in a situation, in a ministry situation or not, I don't usually introduce myself as a pastor. I usually, other people will, but um, I don't usually lead with that, because I think you get farther with people sometimes if they don't know that's what I do.
Mhm.
And they may tell me more things at first, or maybe they're less guarded, or they might swear more. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
But what ends up happening is there's less to be worried about, less preconceived notions, less hangups. And eventually, if it comes up, I might say, I work at a church, but I don't tell people what I do necessarily. And I never really realized it until lately. So I'm about to be ordained in another month. I've
Hooray!
actually been
Yeah.
qualified. Yay! I've been qualified for a year, but things being what they are, that service didn't happen. That ceremony did not happen. So I've been qualified to be ordained for a year, and that sounds like something to people, even people who aren't in a church. I've been district licensed up till that point, and I've kind of realized over this last year that I don't share my credentials with people. And I think I learned a long, long time ago, I don't need to promote myself. God will do all the promoting necessary. There's
Oh
no
my
need to put myself
gosh.
up front.
Oh, what a what a thing
And
the rest of
so,
us can really learn from, by the way.
well, but it's really true. We long for people to know who we are. We long to be
Mm.
known. We long for people to recognize our gifts and our skills and our talents and all those things. because it makes us feel good, and it does glorify God, and that's great. But I do think we say, oh, I'd be great at that because here's all these things I did, or I really want this because I, this, that, and the other thing, or whatever. I've learned this, or I've had this experience, or whatever. And I think a lot of times we treat life like a job interview. We're constantly throwing out our credentials or our experience or whatever to fit in, to be part of the group, to make friends with people, to get that job or whatever. And somewhere along the way, fairly early on, in my Christian walks, probably those smart leaders we were hanging around with and doing business with, who said, you don't have to promote yourself. You let God promote you, and he'll do a much better job than you can ever do. And I tested it. And I think that's another thing with all of this. God doesn't say test me very often in the Bible, but he did say it once. And I figured, well, what else can I do? I can read it in scripture. I can, I can kind of sort out what scripture says about a particular thing, but I can try it. And if it works and it seems like it's scriptural, then I'm probably on the right track. And I tried it once, and I didn't promote myself when I was in the midst of a situation where I very easily could have said, here are all my credentials. Here's what I know. Here's why I'm the smartest person in the room. And when I didn't do that once, someone else came into the room and elevated my position so much higher than I could have on my own. And it didn't look like a jerk doing it. So it was a double bonus.
Yeah.
But honestly, that happened early on. And so all of that to say, I don't tend to lead with my credentials. And God has used that for me to do ministry in funerals and weddings and other avenues, places in the community, being in the hospital, things like that, where they don't assume I'm a pastor, and I actually am able to maybe progress further down the road with somebody because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that. Oh goodness, it's very convicting because the idea of self promotion. Because sometimes I think it's, well, why not? Definitely a product of our culture, and just a little bit different of a spin to what Jesus uses as a metaphor. When it's like when you go to a banquet, do not take the place of seat of honor, for you might be put to shame when master comes out and says, no, that's not where you belong. You belong in the back, and says, go take the lowliest place that you may be invited up. And it's, yeah, what are you doing? Is it about you, or is it about honoring God? And if you're out there promoting yourself, it's all about yourself. And who cares what God's will is? Like, of course he gave me these things. Of course I'm supposed to take it. And oh, what an amazing lesson. Thank you for sharing that. It's not even really something I've ever really thought about. Actually. So, and I tell you, I've only ever heard you preach once, and I I've really longed for it again, and I don't know if because I don't know how many times you've preached at JaxNaz, but I was, at least at that particular weekend, I was there, and I just can't remember what the occasion was. I don't know if it was a Wednesday night. I may have been a Wednesday night that you preached, but I'm like, oh my gosh, what a gift! That was awesome, and I'm just so glad, and the fact you just said you're this ordination, like, oh, how tremendous, because your voice is so important, Pastor Tracy, in this. And I'm just thinking that, not that you need our help, not that you need the help of other people, but in our one of this list of questions I asked, and of course I'm almost kicking myself for even putting it on the list, but I asked, I said, how can us men understand the role of, like, maybe a female pastor more, or for those men who just have a hard time looking at some of the verses that Paul lists out for why women shouldn't serve, or are not, fit for the ministry. And then you look at the Nazarene church, how they interpret it. But then they see your gifts and talents. They don't deny the fact that you have those, but they're struggling. What do you have? I mean, even for those who might be listening from a different persuasion, different denomination, do you have any resources to point them in the right direction? Any words of wisdom to share for those people who are just like, I women in ministry, like, I've only ever seen them in like the elementary school setting at maybe Christian schools or in the daycare or in the nursery, which we have no problem allowing women to do those jobs. It's just when it comes to the higher, more glamorous ones, on the platform and such, it's no, 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 men. That's where men belong. But yet, I don't see too many like about like children's pastors who are men. I don't see that because I think the connotation is, well, that's a job for women, and that's the dirty stuff that's not glamorous. And um, coming from a tradition that didn't say that, but it was more kind of implied. I'm just thinking that, yeah, it's still a point of pride. You talk about self promotion, but I'm just wondering, do we have anything to add for those people?
Well, so I would say tradition, you talked about coming from a tradition, and I think that's a key word, because the roles you're talking about are traditional roles. The woman being the caregiver and the nurturer, which isn't wrong.
No, by no means.
I was just having a conversation with somebody today where I believe that not, I can paint with a broad brush and say men tend to be wired to provide and protect, and women
Oh yeah.
tend to be. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't elements for men and women that cross those traditional roles or boundaries or whatever you want to say, but that's been an easy inroad, or an easier inroad, for a woman to be a children's pastor. That makes sense, or a director of children's ministry, or whatever they would be called. And I honestly, I don't know that I'll ever preach a lot. So you probably heard, I shared a message with someone at one point, probably at a midweek service. I've also done several funerals, or been a part of several. You may have also seen me speak from the women's conference. I've done a couple of messages there, and they've been recorded. So who knows? Who knows which one you picked up on? But I think I was thinking about, again, are those traditional roles. Um, God has gifted me very specifically for the work that I do. Um, he has not gifted me to lead a church. He has gifted me with some messages, but not that leadership role. There are women who I believe he has gifted in that role. One of the things I heard early on when I was a fairly new Christian, and I wondered about women in ministry and what did that look like in leadership roles. Someone who was very affirming to women being in ministry brought up, and I was actually a pastor I was listening to, was and I don't even know if he's still alive anymore, and he led a very large church in China. But he said the Asian culture understands the Bible, especially the Old Testament, but really all of the Bible, because so much of the culture um, had not changed with traditional roles and things like that. And there's a passage in the Bible that says women shouldn't speak in church. And I've heard that one brought up, and people cling to that as well, here's an example. You shouldn't speak. And it's really, the word is talk. And um, st- based on some things that I've read and what this particular pastor said, in the culture at that time, the men would be on one side of the church and the women would be on the other side of the church. And the pastor who was talking was kind of making fun, because he was making it very relatable. He said, okay, men, when the pastor says something and that the Holy Spirit is calling you out. Well, what Paul was saying was, your wife doesn't have to say across the aisle, he's talking to you. So he really believed that it was, women, you don't need to affirm what the leader is saying. The Holy Spirit will convict your husband.
Mhm.
So it was a cultural thing, and it was really to a particular church addressing things that were going on
Yes.
in the church at that time. So we interpret things, and we interpret them in the light of our own culture. And so when you read women shouldn't speak in church, we think of speaking as not talking. We think of that as a public speaking because that's how we talk. So there are verses that um, they are not part of the creed, the things that we stand on as Christians and that most Christians agree on. And this is probably one of those things
Mm.
that's going to be up for debate for a lot of people. I look at women being in ministry and pastoral roles similar to worship styles, to music styles in church. Um, I enjoy a good hymn and I enjoy a good choir, but the church that I worship in has contemporary worship, and God speaks to me through that. It isn't just about enjoying the music. That music opens my heart and prepares me for the message. And it's the way that God speaks to me through music is that music style. While I do enjoy other types of music and other types of church music, God speaks to me in the contemporary worship chorus and the contemporary worship music. Maybe it's because that's what I was listening to before I was saved, was contemporary music. I don't know, but I listen to it almost constantly. That's what's playing in my car. That's what's playing in my home. That's what's playing in my office. And it speaks to me. But in the worship setting, during a worship service, that music is what draws me in. That's not true for everyone.
Mhm.
There are people who need an organ and a choir. And that is how God speaks to them. And that is how they are drawn into a place where they are open to hearing the message that God has given to whoever their leader is. We are all wired very differently. And I believe that every flavor of Christianity allows us all to worship in those ways. And I don't mean worship like just music, but our whole worship service. Um, we all experience that in a different way. I think, not vastly different because there's not that many different styles, but I think that women in ministry can be very similar.
Mhm.
Not every person is geared to not that they should. Ideally, you should have respect for a woman in authority or a woman in ministry, but not everybody's ready for that. So maybe they need to go to a church where they can learn to be ready for that. Maybe being exposed to more women leaders and things. Maybe they've had a bad experience with a female boss, or another female authority figure. Maybe somebody who's really adverse to that. Maybe they need to speak to God about it and see if there's some kind of um, unresolved hurt in their own lives that has caused either anger or um, something that keeps them from being accepting to that idea. It's possible, but I'm not saying that that's the reason why. I'm just saying, when something comes up in my life, I recognize um, if it is something that causes me to be upset, to be angry, to grieve. I need to pay attention to that. I shouldn't be ignoring it. I should be turning towards that and looking for the healing that goes with that. And
Mhm.
so that I've suggested a lot of different avenues there. Um I think women being in ministry is great. I would say that I might not ever be at a church where a woman is the lead pastor, but there aren't that many. So I don't know if I don't know
Right.
if God has that in my plan. For me, for the future, I don't anticipate any changes for me anytime soon. And I know this is where we'll go to church until he tells us differently.
Mhm.
So, um, but yeah, it's exciting. I will tell you the Church of the Nazarene is not supportive in a way of saying, "Oh, you're a woman and you feel called right this way." We go through the same rigorous training as
Yeah.
the guys do, and we all have to know our stuff. And I think that's wonderful. We're not getting a pass. I think and that's how it ought to be.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm glad it's equal and fair treatment, and the idea, the anticipation of not changing. I think I mean, as a testimony for the rest of the church. I mean, your faithfulness and your commitment, ever since you accepted that call, is enough. Your actions have truly spoken much louder than anything that you could ever say. And one of the ways that I've gotten to know you and know your heart is through my mother, because I know my mom and you partnered on a lot of things over the years and collaborated and had meetings and just shared ideas. And my mom has nothing bad to say about you at all. Now, knowing as close of, that I am with my mom, respect my mom, I think, well, there must be somebody, something towards this Pastor Tracy person. So when I got to a point where I started working with you, we developed such a rapport together that I was comfortable knowing that if somebody came to me with an issue, it's particularly a female, I know that I could just I could pass them on in confidence. And you have been instrumental in helping a few of the women that I had the privilege of being around in my the young adult group immersion for the last 5 years. That I know you've been able to help many of them, and that is something that's so important, because I know that this is a greater topic that the culture is reminding the church of, and then therefore the church is reminding the church of that. The church has played a pivotal role in in hurting a lot of women over the years, inadvertently, and sometimes it's like you can't even tell if it was a church or not by their actions. And you, even though that's not your primary role now, as you're the group's pastor at JaxNaz, but one of the gifts that you have is being able to connect with women who have been hurt, who have had multiple wounds in their life, whether it's been inside or outside the church, and you're able to reach into that pain, empathize, and then like actually give direction, not just go, oh, well, yeah, sorry about that, yeah, that stinks, like that's terrible, and then nothing. You're actually able to go on further. And I've actually witnessed that firsthand just through other testimony. And I guess the one of the questions I want to ask is that where does that empathy come from? How are you able to connect with people? Is it through pains that you've gone through that God has then reworked and saying, okay, Tracy, like remember that one time, here's how this is going to help you in the future. And I guess so that's like one question. Then I guess a follow up to that would be, how does the church, particularly with women, because it's more of an issue because I think we've marginalized and not uplifted women in the biblical way that the Bible talks about women. But how do we as men also reach across that line, because we have a role to play in it too?
Right. That's a good question. I think there's a couple of things. I love to learn. I want to grow. The Bible says that God heals, and I really take the Bible. I think I'm fairly simple in a lot of things. I take the Bible at the Bible. It says that God heals us, that He wants to heal us, that there is healing power in the blood of Jesus. I could just go on. And so if that's available, it's not just physical healing. But I think that's the thing we see the most. We see someone else's physical ailment, but there are hidden ailments that people have that are emotional, that are spiritual, that are mental. And I believe God, He is a healing God, and He can and will heal those things. Now, sometimes we don't see the evidence of that here. Some maybe the healing is completed in heaven, but there's no reason not to try. There's no reason not to pray. There's no reason not to seek out resources, um, whether those are through medical professionals, through deeper counseling, through things, resources and different things like that. And I just feel like there are so many things out there. People um, don't don't have to suffer. And that, I don't mean to say like that's a blanket, you should be healed by now, because I do not mean that at all. It
Mhm.
takes time, it takes work. Um, and like I said, we may not see the complete fruit of that healing, but I just know, so I know in my own life, um, God has healed me of things, some of them significant, some of them large, some of them just little boo-boos that He has healed me from.
Mhm.
Um, but I like I said, I test Him, I take Him at His word, and He has never failed me. And sometimes people just need somebody to hear them.
Mhm.
Sometimes people just need someone to listen and to let them say their piece. And so often I think we we talk and talk and talk, and we don't have the person that we could be talking to. And that person can be Jesus, certainly. Sometimes that person is Jesus with skin on. And I've personally have had some pretty good successes with people um, because of my particular gifting, but also because sometimes people just need somebody to be in the valley with them. And I think that's the call of a pastor, but I also think that's the
Yeah.
call of a Christian. And we are called to walk with people. The Bible goes on and on about things like that, about standing in the gap. I mean, that's a pretty specific thing, and that just means, essentially you're praying for someone. Standing in the gap seems like also walking with someone. So I think that's something we men and women can do. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, can I help you? Or how can I help you? And then let the person tell you. Um, there are sometimes, and I predominantly, this, I predominantly meet with women. I will meet with men occasionally and for brief amounts of time. You and I had to do a lot of scheduling things because
Mhm.
I think it's important for your integrity and mine that we always avoid the appearance of evil. And so a lot
Yeah.
of times we were doing acrobatics to meet at a time when there were other people in the office suite here at the church, or you were also meeting with Pastor James, so you were getting counsel from both of us and that kind of thing. But I have a couple of friends that I've met with over the years that we laugh about it now, but I kept having to say, I really want to help you. How can I help you? And some people have carried their hurt so long, and maybe this is women, I don't know, but have carried this hurt or this wrong thinking or incorrect belief about themselves, maybe about their value or lack thereof, or whatever, um, that it's hard to accept help. And
Mm.
so sometimes I have to
Yeah.
ask a few times. And I think it's always letting the Spirit be your guide. And that I know that can sound a little ethereal, like, no, I need to know, what are the steps? The steps are being a good friend. The steps are saying, if you're a man and you feel like there's a woman in your life that you should reach out to, you probably need to be cautious because you don't want to be necessarily misinterpreted either, or cause more pain. But it's okay to say the truth. And if the truth is, I see that you seem to be hurting, is there anything I can do? And then listen and see what happens. I think it's hard for us to do that. I think we want to fill that space. Um,
Yeah, I was
and
gonna
and
ask
it's
you,
hard
like,
for the
what.
wounded person, the hurt person, to respond.
Yeah, I can understand from the wounded, perspective, standpoint, I guess, but you're just saying it's hard for us. Why do you think it is hard for us to be able to take that step and reach out?
Uh, I'm so glad you asked. Because we don't want to look like a fool.
Mm.
We don't want to. We all want to sit at the cool kids table in the lunchroom.
Boy, do we. Boy, do we.
Right. And it's, if I look like an idiot, if I look like a fool, if I stumble and fall publicly, and I might not tear a hole in my jeans, but I fell down publicly. Um, I might be embarrassed. I might reach out and have someone say something hurtful back to me, like, why are you, get away from me, or I don't want to talk to you, or you can't help me, or you're fill in the blank. But somewhere early on, so this is so we didn't talk about this, but one of my volunteer ministries is playing in the band as a
Yes.
musician. So this, but the people listening don't know this. So I play the drums. I'm self-taught. I always wanted to play, and happened to be in a band playing another instrument, and talked with a drummer and said, just show me. I'm sure I can't do what you're doing, but just show me, because I've wanted to play the drums since I was a little kid. When the marching band goes by, I get a little weepy when the drums go by. It's so weird. Anyway, you didn't need to know that. so so anyway, I learned to play the drums, being self-taught for a long time. Eventually I did take lessons, but I played. Turns out I did know what I was doing, and I could figure it out. And there was a latent ability to play, a natural talent to play, that I played for a long time, without refining that at all. So God took that passion, and he gave me the desires of my heart, just like scripture says. It's crazy. But I would be embarrassed for a flub, making a mistake in a song, or losing the tempo, or, it's kind of important, some of the things drummers do. And somewhere along the line, and I don't know if this was a Holy Spirit thing, I thought it up myself and God affirmed it or whatever, but um if I'm going to be a fool, at least I'm a fool for Jesus. If I fall down on the ground, or if I get embarrassed, I'm embarrassed for Jesus. And it's probably not that bad. Um, it really is. It takes me out of the equation. It keeps me from being, because if I'm focused on myself, I'll be so tense, I will mess up. And that can be in music, that can be in life. If I'm worried about what I look like, which is really hard, because on Zoom, you can fix your hair all day long.
Right. It's why I've
But
always been told I have a
it,
face for radio.
oh, nice. Oh, I wish I had my drums now. That was great. I should have given you a rim shot for that. Um, but seriously, if I'm worried about me and how I look, um, physically or otherwise, how I come off, what I sound like, if I'm focused on that, I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to put myself out there. And I'm not saying it's easy. I present a little more extroverted, but I am definitely on the introverted side. Um, that takes some energy for me, and it allows me to an opportunity to continue to get closer and closer with God, and always, do I need to talk to this person? Bringing my attention to things. After 30 years of walking with him, I should be better at it. And so, that's another tip, I guess, is just keep walking with the Lord. Don't stop. Don't give up. He'll tell you. He will tell you. If you say, please tell me what to do, you will know. It's a little risky, not gonna lie. But yeah, if I'm gonna be a fool, at least I'm a fool for Jesus. And that I'll tell you what, that takes care of so many worries. Um,
Yeah.
because I, and honestly, in a setting of Christians, what's the worst that's going to happen?
Sure.
They're not going to throw me to the lions. Um, it's they're read the Old Testament. It's not going to be that bad.
That you bring up a great something that I've had to realize, and it's been a connecting theme in my life, that when I was in sports in high school, I look back now, I didn't like it. I really didn't have fun. Even though I was decently talented, did a lot. In playing basketball, never wanted the ball in my hands, but yet for a couple years I was the best player on my team, and I was a leading scorer, and I hated it. And I was the best runner at Western for long distance when I was of age, and I didn't look forward to cross country. I didn't look forward to track. When I got to college, and I was part of the preaching ambassador program at Olivet Nazarene University, when we'd have an opportunity to go and preach a few times a semester, I dreaded it. If I was preaching that Sunday, that Monday before, 6 days, I'm in language or biology class, and I'm just sweating bullets because I'm like, oh, I got to preach, and my whole weekend's ruined because I got to go preach. Even though I liked it, I was so self-absorbed. I was so focusing on like my team. Don't they know how important I am? And if I mess up here, if I miss that shot, because God forbid anybody else misses a shot on a basketball game, or if I don't run my best, or if I don't preach the best sermon, like because those people came here to see me. Don't they know how important of a message I have to preach is? And what I've realized is that once I stepped away from a lot of that, because there was a time period between leaving Olivet and then accepting this pastoral call I have now, adds to exactly what you're saying, because I no longer get nervous. Um, and the reason why I had to slowly realize, and I'll put it in a little bit more bluntly from what you're putting it, is that I'm really not that important. Um, Jesus is the one who qualifies me if we're serving in ministry. I literally have nothing to offer. And there's a lot of peace in that because it doesn't have to do with me at all. Doesn't mean we don't put forth effort, doesn't mean we don't pray, doesn't mean that we don't have a strive for excellence by any means, but it kind of like this, you said, this peace process of realizing that there is nothing that I in my worldly body, worldly understanding that I'm going to do that's going to influence or going to affect people. A prime example would be the Memorial Day parade in North Adams, yeah, that we had this past weekend. Or, well, I guess by the time you're listening to this, everybody, it would be Memorial Day weekend. um, the mayor and the pastors in town got together to plan this little cemetery service, and they told me to preach, and I'm like,
Nice.
what, why, and I had somebody come up to me before who was not necessarily a religious person and says, now listen, if I'm going to listen to somebody preach, it's going to be listening to somebody who's much prettier than you. And that was really funny, and pretty blunt. And he says, because no one came here to listen to you. And he said something that I will not say on the podcast, but he said basically, listen to you blab. And it was like, yeah, I know that. Yeah, like that. There's a lot of peace in knowing that there's nothing I'm going to say here. And I think it speaks to the fact that we sometimes have that temptation of feeling we're so important, we have so much to offer, when all a person maybe wants is somebody to listen. It has literally nothing to do with you. It's the fact that you are willing to listen and not say anything or do anything because they might not have that person in their life.
Right. Absolutely. I think it's funny because I've those those interactions, you would think those would be terrible, but they're kind of funny.
Oh, they're hilarious.
Because that person that what's that?
Oh, they're hilarious.
What'd you say?
They're
Yeah,
downright
because
funny because it's. I mean, they're just saying something that's truthful, ultimately.
right. And who knows what their goal is. I mean, maybe it's to offend, I don't know, but or maybe it's to keep you at arm's length or put you in your place or whatever. But I have had some of the best conversations, particularly at funerals. They're very similar. Like, I don't tell them that I'm the pastor, I'm the officiant, and it shows up in a little card, and they make the connection when I stand up to go talk. But I've been talking to people um, at the visitation or prior to a memorial service for a while, and nobody really knows. And then all of a sudden, I get up to speak, and they go, "I was talking to the pastor." Um,
Hmm.
it's okay, don't worry about it. But it makes you relatable too when you don't get upset about stuff like that. When you don't take the bait, um, it's good for people. And who knows what they've been through or what their experience has been or what they've been taught, or we can't know all of that. All we know is the interaction we're having right now. And what I said at the beginning, Andy Stanley said it. I'll give him credit a couple more times, then I'm going to make it my own probably. uh, but he said, what does love require of me?
Yeah. Yes.
What does love require of me? Well, love honestly requires everything. And I'm trying my best to not come up short to everything, no matter what that looks like.
Hmm.
And I don't know what that will look like for my life. But it's worked out pretty good.
Hmm.
I'm my Christian walk has not been a breeze, but it has been amazing. It has I can't tell you how wonderful it is in the midst of the valleys I've been through, and I've been through some. My life has not been perfect, but so far love has required everything, and I have somehow figured out to the best of my ability to give that more often than not.
Hmm.
And hopefully I'll keep getting better at that.
Yeah. Well, if that attitude continues, it absolutely will. And you're there's a reason why like I said, I wanted you to be on this show, and I think people will end up relating to that desire. So I'm so grateful that you were able to set aside some time in order to answer some of these questions, these things that I know uniquely you have a perspective on that I think deserves to be shared. And thank you for that, for your parting wisdom here as we close, Pastor Tracy. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Michael.
Of course. Sorry.
Pastor Michael.
Oh no, I don't. The the running joke, the running joke between Pastor Tracy and I heard my nickname to her is PT. I call her Pastor Tracy PT. It's pretty easy to figure out there, but she ever since I started leading this group of young adults, which I've now moved on from, she kept calling me Pastor Michael, and I hated it. I absolutely hated that title, and she kept putting these little bit of seeds of like, yeah, it's like, well, what you're doing, you're shepherding these people, you're pastoring them. I said, no, I'm not, no, I'm not, and she never stopped calling me that. Well, now she can actually call me that, and it's applicable, and I just have to eat it.
Right. There you go. Sorry about that.
Yes. Well,
Affirmation of the body, though. That's what it is.
coming totally coming full circle. But thank you, friend. I'm so grateful for you, and my prayers are with you and your ministry. And I'm so grateful for your sacrifice and your service for this many years, and for that many more years to come.
Thank you. And you are a gift, my friend. I'm so excited that you have a church that is enjoying the gift that you are. So I'm
Uh,
very excited.
well, you've had a role to play in that, and I think that's what makes it all like very, very exciting looking back. I think from what you said, looking, being able to tell your story looking back, and seeing how God planted these seeds, and you saw that desire now coming to fruition in what you're doing. I see the same thing. And look what God has done in your life, and how your ministry and your craftsmanship and how God's used you has gone far beyond the walls of JaxNaz. I think that's probably, in my opinion, the coolest part.
That's just serving Jesus, right?
Hmm.
That's how it goes.
Hmm. Oh, well, until next time, so appreciate it. We're going to have you back on. But until then, Pastor Tracy, PT, I hope you have an amazing night, okay?
Absolutely, PM. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much again to Pastor Tracy, and for her time, commitment, and sacrifice for the sake of the ministry. She played an integral part in my young adult group in the last 5 years. And through that mentorship, she has been able to become a co heir in the pastorate, along with myself, as I've been called into pastoral ministry. And there's not one thing that I cannot take from all our conversations. I have taken it all into my call at my church. So she is continuing to have an impact far beyond the walls of JaxNaz Church. So thank you, Pastor Tracy, for your time. I know that a lot of the women in particular will have taken a lot from this conversation and your time. So thank you so much. Thanks for listening to this podcast. And as always, may God bless you and may God keep you.